Your life is nothing. My daughter screamed those words at me in front of 12 people at her final wedding dress fitting, moments after I had handed over yet another check to ensure her perfect day. I built a $24 million real estate empire from absolutely zero. I worked 80-hour weeks after my wife passed away. I gave this girl everything: an Ivy League education, a dream house, designer wardrobes, everything. But apparently, my life was nothing. The boutique went dead silent. Even strangers froze mid-conversation to stare. I walked out without a word. But 3 days later, she discovered what nothing actually looks like when everything you thought was yours suddenly evaporates. See, there was something my ungrateful daughter didn't know, something that was about to shatter her world forever. My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm a real estate mogul, and I was about to teach my daughter the most expensive lesson of her life. What happened next? She learned that calling someone's life nothing can make your own life become exactly that. But before I tell you how her fairy tale wedding became her worst nightmare, drop a comment and let me know, what's the most disrespectful thing a family member has ever said to you? And if you're new here, hit subscribe to this channel because you won't want to miss what happens when quiet revenge meets loud consequences. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really started. 28 years ago, I was a different man entirely. My wife, Eleanor, had just died from cancer after a 2-year battle that drained our savings and broke my spirit. Victoria was only 3 years old, clutching her stuffed rabbit in that sterile hospital waiting room while machines beeped their final rhythmic songs. I knelt beside Eleanor's bed and made a promise that would define the next 3 decades of my existence. "She'll never want for anything," I whispered through tears I thought would never stop. "I'll build her the perfect life. I swear it." Little did I know what kind of monster I was creating in that moment of grief. Back then, Apex Heritage Group was just me, a battered Honda Civic, and a dream bigger than my bank account. I had $3,200 in savings, a real estate license I'd earned by studying at night while Eleanor was in chemo, and the desperate determination of a widower who'd promised his dying wife the impossible. Those first years nearly killed me. I worked endlessly, sleeping 4 hours a night when I was lucky. My hands grew calloused from hammering for sale signs into frozen ground. My back ached from lifting boxes of documents into that Honda's cramped trunk. My throat went hoarse from making cold calls until 9 p.m. every night. I thought love meant never saying no. But every sacrifice felt sacred when I saw Victoria's smile over breakfast cereal. Every missed dinner, every weekend at the office, every vacation I postponed. It was all for her future, the foundation I was building, brick by financial brick. Private schools cost $28,000 a year. I paid it without blinking, even when it meant instant noodles for my own dinners. Her university tuition ran over $320,000 total over 4 years. I signed those checks like they were love letters to Eleanor's memory. Her first apartment deposit in San Francisco? Done. Credit cards for essential shopping, car payments for vehicles she crashed twice, that European graduation trip where she barely called. I covered everything with the devotion of a man keeping a deathbed promise. Every yes made the next demand bigger. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was building Victoria's perfect life, I was building an empire. By my 50th birthday, Apex Heritage Group owned 43 properties. By 55, we'd expanded to 2 states with 87 properties. By 60, the numbers had exploded beyond my wildest dreams from those Honda Civic days. 127 properties across 3 states. Social centers, office buildings, residential developments. My personal portfolio was worth $24.3 million on paper, but the real wealth was in the complexity. Shell companies, LLCs, partnerships within partnerships, Sterling Holdings LLC, Vantage Property Trust, Cornerstone Development Group. Each entity served a purpose: tax optimization, liability protection, investment flexibility. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. Everything was bulletproof. My lawyers sometimes struggled to track the full scope of what I'd built. 3 file cabinets in my home office contained the paper trail of a man who turned grief into gold. I'd built a kingdom on the promise I made to a dying woman, ensuring our daughter never experienced the poverty and fear that had haunted my own childhood. I had no idea I was creating a monster. That's when Julian Thorne slithered into our lives like a snake in a bespoke suit. 30 years old, a corporate lawyer in a mid-tier firm. Perfect white teeth, perfectly styled hair, and perfectly empty pockets hidden behind perfectly crafted lies. He met Victoria at a children's hospital charity gala, an event I'd sponsored to the tune of $50,000 because Eleanor had always believed in giving back. From the moment he shook my hand with that firm lawyer's grip, his questions weren't about my daughter's dreams, they were surgical inquiries about my business. "So, Mr. Sterling, how many properties do you actually own?" he asked over champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries. "What's your expansion strategy for the next 5 years? Are you looking for investment partners? Do you ever consider development projects in emerging markets?" The paperwork I signed that day would change everything, but I was blind to the red flags flapping in the wind. Julian's student loans totaled $180,000 from his law degree. His credit score was 580, low enough that he couldn't qualify for a bicycle loan, let alone a mortgage on anything larger than a garden shed. His checking account rarely held more than 4 figures, and his investment portfolio was non-existent. But Victoria was glowing with that particular radiance that only comes from believing you've found your soulmate. When she was happy, I was happy. It was that simple and that dangerous. So when Julian surprised her 6 months later with a proposal to buy a $2.8 million house in the prestigious Heights neighborhood, I did what I'd always done when Victoria wanted something beyond reach. I made it happen, quietly, efficiently, through the labyrinthine financial structures I'd spent decades perfecting. Sterling Holdings LLC, one of my lesser-known shell companies, purchased the property outright. Julian's name went on the deed as the buyer, but the real ownership flowed through a maze of legal documents that led directly back to my filing cabinets. The mortgage payments came from my accounts through automatic transfers masked as rental income. The property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance costs, landscaping fees, all of it traced back to my checkbook. Julian contributed exactly 0 to his dream home, not 1 penny. Every vendor answered to me, not them. But the beautiful lie was so well constructed that even Victoria believed Julian had bought their house through some mysterious combination of legal savvy and family money. She bragged to her friends about her fiancé's brilliant investment strategy and his family connections in real estate. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. Her boyfriend was living in a house he could never afford, purchased by the father-in-law he barely tolerated. The wedding planning followed the same pattern of hidden subsidies and manufactured miracles. Victoria demanded an $85,000 budget, more than many people's annual salaries, for a single day's celebration. She wanted the grand estate, the most exclusive venue in 3 counties, where booking required 18 months advance notice or significant leverage with the owner. I had leverage. Lucas Grant, the owner of the grand estate, owed me $980,000 from a real estate development deal that had gone sideways. In 2019, Lucas had invested in a shopping center project that collapsed when the anchor tenant pulled out, leaving him with massive debt. I'd carried that debt for 3 years, accepting monthly payments that barely covered the interest. Lucas knew that when Arthur Sterling called asking for favors, the answer was always yes. The catering came from Marco's Fine Dining, where I'd been hosting company events for 12 years and spending $40,000 annually. The photography was handled by Elena Vance Studios, whose lease I'd negotiated and whose studio rent I'd personally guaranteed during the pandemic, when her business nearly collapsed. The flowers would come from Bella Blooms, owned by my ex-business partner's daughter, whom I'd helped establish with a $75,000 startup loan 5 years ago. Every element of their perfect day was connected to my network, my relationships, my money. Julian's contribution to their dream wedding was his signature on documents I'd already paid to prepare. Then there was Eleanor's life insurance policy in the trust fund that would haunt this story like a ghost with a law degree. $1.2 million in trust for Victoria, established when she was born. The withdrawal clause was buried in paragraph 7 of a 12-page legal document that Victoria had never bothered to read. Any withdrawal over $15,000 required paternal consent and dual signatures from both the trustee and the beneficiary. For 25 years, I'd been automatically approving everything. Every designer handbag that cost more than a used car, every spa weekend that rivaled most people's vacation budgets, every spontaneous shopping spree. She thought it was her money flowing freely from some magical account that never ran dry. I let her think that because saying no had become impossible years ago. Every signature was a chain I was forging around my own neck. The disrespect started small, like a cancer that metastasizes so gradually you don't notice until it's everywhere. Christmas dinner 2 years ago, Victoria was hosting for the first time in the house I was secretly paying for, serving wine I'd bought, using dishes that came from my credit card. When Julian's college friends arrived, she introduced me with a laugh that cut deeper than she intended. "Everyone, this is my tenant, Arthur. He lives in that cute little bungalow down the street." The joke was that I lived in a 1,200 square foot bungalow while they had 4,000 square feet of luxury. What nobody knew was that I could have bought their house 10 times over because I had already bought it once. Julian laughed along, his arm around my daughter's waist, his eyes meeting mine with something that might have been challenge or might have been contempt. The other guests laughed too, not knowing they were witnessing a daughter mock the father who'd given her everything. I carved the turkey with steady hands, my chest tight with something I couldn't yet name. I swallowed my pride like I'd done 1,000 times before. The comments escalated like floodwater, rising 1 inch at a time. At dinner parties, events I was inadvertently funding, Victoria would hold court about real estate market trends with the confidence of someone who'd never actually bought a property herself. "Dad was just lucky with timing," she'd explain to captivated audiences who hung on every word from the beautiful young woman in designer clothes. "He bought cheap in the 90s when nobody wanted real estate in this area. It's not like he's some brilliant investor or anything. Right place, right time." Julian would nod knowingly, adding his professional lawyer's credibility to her dismissive analysis. "Real estate is basically passive income for lazy people," he'd say, swirling wine that cost more per bottle than his monthly contribution to their household budget, which was zero. Any idiot with decent timing and a little capital could have done the same thing. It's not like building a law practice or creating something that requires actual skill. They'd suggest I needed hobbies instead of work, as if my empire was some quaint retirement project rather than the engine that funded their entire lifestyle. I'd overhear these conversations from the kitchen, washing dishes in the house I'd bought them, listening to them mock the foundation of everything they enjoyed. But it was about to get so much worse. The engagement party was my first glimpse of what complete invisibility felt like. 50 guests in the backyard I was paying to maintain, eating food from vendors who sent their bills to my office, drinking wine from my personal collection that Victoria had borrowed without asking. When the time came for toasts, I found myself standing in the corner like hired help, holding a beer and waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Victoria stood on the deck I'd had built, using the microphone I'd rented, and delivered a speech that thanked literally everyone except the man who'd made the entire event possible. She thanked Julian's parents for raising such an amazing, self-sufficient man. Self-sufficient, the words burned in my throat like acid. She thanked her college friends for being her chosen family, as if the man who'd raised her alone through chickenpox and homework and heartbreak was somehow less family than people she'd known for 5 years. She thanked the caterer by name. She thanked the DJ. She thanked everyone except me, the man who'd funded the entire $12,000 party without being asked, without being thanked, without even being acknowledged as anything more than furniture. The budget meetings that followed grew increasingly tense. Victoria wanted upgrades to everything. $40,000 more for dream elements, premium flowers, a videographer, vintage limousines, welcome bags stuffed with artisanal products, upgrade after upgrade. Julian sat silent through these meetings, scrolling through his phone while I tried to suggest reasonable alternatives. When I mentioned the total cost approaching 6 figures, Victoria would roll her eyes. "Dad, you can afford it. Stop being so dramatic about money." Dramatic? As if wanting some financial boundaries made me hysterical rather than responsible. When I asked Julian to contribute something, anything, to his own wedding, Victoria's defense was swift and sharp. "He's saving for our future investments. You wouldn't understand because you've never thought beyond just collecting rent checks." Just collecting rent checks, as if building a multi-million-dollar empire was equivalent to being a small-time landlord. Then she crossed the line I never knew existed. Bella Couture was supposed to be the triumphant finale. The appointment had been scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I arrived 15 minutes early with my checkbook. The boutique was fuller than I'd expected. Victoria's 3 bridesmaids, Julian's mother, Patricia, the photographer, and several other women. Champagne flutes circulated among the group while Victoria held court in her $8,000 gown. The budget discussion started innocently enough, extra beading, adjustments, but then Victoria mentions the shoes. Designer heels, custom dyed to match the precise shade of ivory in her dress, shoes that cost $2,200. When I hesitated, when I asked if she really needed custom shoes for a 4-hour event, the temperature in the boutique dropped like someone had opened a freezer door. "Seriously, Dad?" Victoria's voice cut through the champagne-scented air like broken glass scraping against concrete. "Your life is nothing compared to what I'm building." The words hit me like ice water thrown in my face. My hands went cold while my face burned hot with shame. The boutique's crystal chandeliers seemed to dim as her voice rose. "You're just some old man who got lucky with property, some boring landlord who thinks collecting rent checks makes him important. Julian and I are creating something real, not some outdated family business that nobody cares about anymore." My chest constricted. Julian stood behind his bride-to-be, and his reaction told me everything I needed to know. He didn't intervene. He didn't defend me. He just stood there with a barely suppressed smirk, enjoying the show. 30 years I've worked my ass off to build something lasting, while you've just sat around getting lucky with timing. Julian understands real ambition, real success that comes from actual work instead of just inheriting daddy's business and playing landlord. The irony was so complete, it felt like performance art. Standing in a boutique I was paying for, wearing a dress I'd bought, surrounded by bridesmaids whose expenses I'd covered. But the cruelest part was the inheritance reference. I hadn't inherited anything except debt and heartbreak. I'd built Apex Heritage Group from nothing after Eleanor died. The boutique went silent, except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears like war drums. The bridal consultant backed away like we were radioactive. 12 people watched as my daughter prepared to detonate our relationship for designer shoes. I placed the check for the dress alterations on the marble counter with movements so careful they felt like a religious ceremony. My voice, when I finally found it, was steady in a way that surprised even me. "I see. Well, that changes everything." I walked out without looking back, leaving behind 12 witnesses to the moment my daughter destroyed our relationship. I walked out without saying a word, but my silence was about to speak louder than her screams ever could. I sat in the parking lot for 27 minutes, hands shaking. My phone buzzed with incoming calls from Victoria, Julian, everyone. I ignored them all. The drive home was a blur, but somewhere during that journey, something crystallized in my chest. Not anger, something colder, resolution. In my home office, surrounded by 30 years of documents, I sat across from Eleanor's framed photograph. I looked at her eyes in the photo, and for a brief moment, I felt a crushing wave of guilt. Had I failed her? I had promised to give Victoria everything, but in doing so, I had taken away the one thing that builds character: struggle. I realized then that saving my daughter meant destroying the fantasy I had built for her. I opened my filing cabinets and began systematically reviewing documents. Sterling Holdings LLC owned Victoria's house. The Grand Estate owed me $980,000. The trust fund required my signature. Every aspect of their independent life was connected to my network. I was the spider at the center of a web I'd spent 28 years weaving, and spiders, when threatened, know exactly which strands to cut. I picked up my phone and made the first call. Property Management Northwest, this is Arthur Sterling. I need to initiate reclamation procedures for the Sterling Holdings property on Maple Street, occupied by the Thorne family. Is this an eviction, sir? Eviction. 30-day notice effective immediately. File it by Monday. They were living in a lie about their home ownership. She had no idea what was coming. The second call went to Lucas Grant at the Grand Estate. Lucas, I need to cancel the Sterling Thorne wedding. But Arthur, the wedding is in 3 days. The cancellation fees. You owe me $980,000, Lucas. Cancel the wedding. Consider the fees a payment toward your outstanding debt. His protests died in his throat. Debt is debt. The third step was the bank. Heritage Bank had handled Eleanor's trust for decades. I want all withdrawal authorizations revoked, I told the bank president. Any amount over $15,000 requires my approval. If the beneficiary disputes this, remind them of the clause regarding the trustee's rights until age 35. My phone had been ringing continuously. 17 missed calls from Victoria, 9 from Julian. I let them all go to voicemail. Then came the vendors. Marco, I need to cancel the wedding catering. Elena, cancel the photography. I'll cover the lost bookings, but you won't be needed. Isabella at Bella Bloom's, the wedding is canceled. Uncle Arthur, surely this can be worked out, she asked. Some things can't be worked out, sweetheart. Within 48 hours, their dream wedding had evaporated. No venue, no vendors, no access to funds. The foundation they'd called nothing had disappeared. Then I left town. I changed my phone number and checked into a mountain cabin 3 hours away, completely off the grid. For the first time in 28 years, I was unreachable. I spent 3 days reading books and hiking in the clean mountain air. No crisis management, no checks to write. I thought about Eleanor constantly. She would have been appalled by what Victoria had become. You created a monster, I could almost hear her say. You confused enabling with love. The wedding was supposed to happen on Saturday. Instead, I hiked forest trails while their world collapsed. I returned on Sunday to find my voicemail system crashed. My assistant had fielded dozens of frantic calls. The details of the disaster reached me through the grapevine. City Hall ceremony, 8 guests total. Julian's parents, 2 friends, and a guilty bridesmaid. No reception. Victoria wore an $89 department store dress. No professional photos, just iPhone pictures. No flowers except a grocery store bouquet. The entire celebration lasted 47 minutes. She finally understood what empty felt like. The aftermath was swift. Julian and Victoria were evicted and moved into a studio apartment in a cheaper district. Julian's law firm began asking questions about his financial stability. Partners don't get evicted or default on credit cards. Victoria's social circle abandoned her. Fair-weather friends don't like studio apartments and potluck dinners. 6 months after the boutique meltdown, divorce papers were filed. Financial stress reveals character flaws that money hides. Julian blamed Victoria for destroying their cash cow. Victoria blamed Julian for being a fraud. 13 months after the incident, Victoria showed up at my office. She looked smaller. The designer clothes were replaced by a department store business suit. Her nails were unpolished. She drove a used Honda Civic just like mine from 30 years ago. She sat across from my desk like a job applicant. Dad, I understand now, she said, her voice shaking. I was wrong about everything. I said unforgivable things. I'm asking if we can start over. I listened. Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of company stationery. I picked up my fountain pen and wrote one word. Nothing. I slid the paper across the desk. You said my life was nothing. You said my sacrifice was nothing. This is what nothing looks like when it's all you have left. She cried. Dad, please, I'm trying to build something real now. It's hard. Then keep building it, I replied, but build it without the expectation that the foundation you rejected will ever be available again. Security escorted her out. 6 months later, a letter arrived. Her handwriting was shaky but honest. I understand now what you built. I understand what nothing really means. I'm trying to build something real now, Dad. It's slow and difficult, but it's mine. Maybe someday I'll be worthy of the father I rejected. I filed that letter next to the first one, and the answer remained the same. Nothing. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to discover their own strength through struggle. If you enjoyed this story of family boundaries and quiet consequences, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell.